Before starting this video, consider joining my new Discord server and becoming a Patreon. There are definitely some really awesome people on this Discord, and we talk about new spoilers and some deck advice. We do have an awesome time on there, so come by and check it out. I do want to give a shout out to my supporters on Patreon. We do have Toadsavelt, who is a Galta tier member. So if you want to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon. There are some great benefits for you. So with that out of the way, let's get into this week's video. So what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on PubStomp MTG. Glad to have you here. So far in the Jumpstart 2022 product line, I've made 3 commanders. If you want to go check them out, they're in the previous videos. But today we're going to be going over Zask, Skittering, Swarmlord. To be honest, I think this is probably going to be the most popular insect tribal commander out there. I know there's Grist, but to be honest, with all that this card is doing, I feel like this is going to be very popular for an insect tribal. It has, you may play lands and cast insect spells from your graveyard. That is super huge right there. You're having a Crucible of Worlds on your commander for 5 mana. I know it's a lot, but again, it's on your commander. You're going to have access to it anytime. And also, whenever another insect you control dies, put it on the bottom of its owner library, then mill 2 cards. So obviously it has that stipulation. If you're just going to repeatedly sacrifice bugs, it's going to get really powerful because you can go through some really huge loops. So I feel like they had to nerf that a little bit. Also, it does have a pretty good relevant ability, pay 1 and a Golgari color. Target insect gets +1/+0 and gains death touch until end of turn. So you can definitely hold that up, make sure, hey, opponent, don't hit me because I'll block in with my insect that has death touch now. When covering this deck, I'm going to go over some different themes. I'm going to go over a graveyard theme, also a little bit of a self-mill theme, and on top of that, obviously insects as well. So when you think of insects, who's the #1 enemy of insects? Well, it's clearly frogs. Frogs are the big giant predators that are always going after insects. But this is all changing because they have a common enemy. They are going to be going against our opponents, and so they are uniting together to have a common purpose. So we have 2 cards, Urg, Spawn of Turg. Jeez, I'm sorry, just the name is funny. And the Gitrog monster. The main reason why I do like Urg in the field is because at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard. So I honestly feel like that's some great utility right there. We can put some lands into the graveyard if we don't want to draw into that, and then we can put it back on the battlefield with our commander. And even especially with Gitrog monster, it's even more insane because we could play additional lands on each of our turns. And if we do have fetch lands, we could keep on using those with our commander's ability. Aside from frogs, I did want to mention World Shaper as well, because whenever it attacks, you may mill 3 cards. Obviously, we're going to be definitely milling some cards. And then when it dies, you can return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Again, if you're running a lot of fetch lands or different type of cards, you could easily get a whole lot of lands into your battlefield. Speaking of graveyards, we do have a little bit of a graveyard synergy here because we do either want to get bugs into our graveyard or lands into our graveyard. So I think Angel of Suffering is absolutely incredible in here. I don't know why it doesn't see enough play, because instead of getting damage dealt to you, you're going to be milling twice as many cards instead of that damage, which just means more bugs in our graveyard. Another fantastic include to add into this list would be Old Rusting, because simply at the beginning of your upkeep, you can mill a card, or if it enters the battlefield, if a land was milled that way, you get to create a treasure token, and if a creature was milled that way, you get to create a 1/1 green insect creature token. So this is great because we're either going to get some treasure tokens or get a green insect token. I mean, we'll get a blood token if we have a non-creature, non-land card milled that way, but most likely we'll want to get those other 2 abilities. However, if a lot of cards are going into the graveyard, a lot of creature cards, we need to have Sir Conrad the Grim. This could actually be a game winner for us if we mill a lot of creatures into our graveyard, because whenever a creature dies or a creature card is put in from the graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad deals 1 damage each opponent. That could be huge because we're going to be going back and forth, putting bugs into the graveyard, putting them back on the battlefield, so we could do a huge amount of damage. So with all this milling, we could easily put a lot of lands into our graveyard, and if they're fetch lands, that's even better because we do have a Crucible of Worlds on our commander, and we do have some really great cards that we get extra land drops, like Oracle of Moldiah, Wayward Sawtooth, and Azusa Lost But Seeking. So consistently, when you have a fetch land in the graveyard, you can play it, then have it go to the graveyard, and then keep on coming back and forth. Depending on how much cards that have, you may play additional lands. So enough about lands, let's talk about some Planeswalkers to add into the party. So the first Planeswalker I did want to include in this list would be Vraska, Golgari Queen. We could get some extra card draw with that +2 ability, and also on top of that with that -3 ability, we could destroy a target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less. Yeah, non-land permanent, so that means people's soul rings or people's pesky creatures, you name it right there. That's a really great utility right there with Vraska. I did mention Grist Grist before, but Grist is actually a really great card in here in the 99 because it has a lot of really great abilities, because it does have a token generator right there, and then you can mill a card. If it was an insect card, you could put another loyalty counter on it and then repeat the process. Also on top of it, it does have some great utility of removing target creatures or planeswalkers as long as you sacrifice another creature. And the last card I did want to mention is Renin 7. This is a really interesting card in this deck because it has a lot of really great abilities, but honestly the most impactful ability is actually that +1. You can reveal the top 4 cards of your library and put all lands revealed that way into your hand and the rest in the graveyard. So say for example, if you drew 1 land and then 3 of them were insects, you can put those insects right in the graveyard and they count as your hand with the graveyard because of your commander's ability. But enough about all this extra stuff. We want to talk about insects because that's what we're in here for. We want to talk about that tribal support that we do have for those insects. I do really like the new interesting cards that came about with the Warhammer crossover. I would say it provided us some really great insects like Canoptech, Scarab Swarm, and Canoptech Tomb Sentinel. I would say the better of the two would be Canoptech Tomb Sentinel because it has an amazing ability coming from the graveyard to the battlefield. You can exile up to 1 target non-land permanent. You don't have to worry about paying that unearth cost because of our commander. We can play insects from a graveyard to the battlefield, so we'll only pay 4 mana to do that, and that's absolutely incredible right there. But let's talk about some other great insects that have some really great utility like Hex Parasite. If your opponents are playing Super Friends or if they're playing some heavy 1/1 counter themes, this is absolutely going to wreck them because you can remove up to X counters from target permanent. So yes, that does include Planeswalker counters as well, so that you could buff up Hex Parasite and then swing in for a lot of damage that way. I did also want to mention Caustic Caterpillar. We could sacrifice it to destroy a target artifact or enchantment. I mean, unfortunately we can't repeat this because our commander will put it back into the bottom of our library. However, because it's an insect, we could put it into the graveyard and then put it back on the battlefield to destroy another target artifact or enchantment, so I think this is great utility right here. However, I'd say we definitely have a huge problem here. We have a huge bug infestation here that is growing rampant because of the amount of tokens we're going to be making. The biggest offender in this is definitely Scoot Swarm because we are in a little bit of a landfall theme. Scoot Swarm is going to get out of control super quick. I mean, I'll be honest, like Scoot Swarm is honestly a big mathematical headache in my mind because we played some games, me and my cousins and my wife play a lot, and we see this come on the battlefield and we know we got to get rid of it immediately because we know what's coming next, a Crater Hoof right after that. But to be honest, this is a really crazy card because you could just make so much tokens off of this. I would definitely say this is probably one of the best cards in the deck because of the amount of land synergies we do have with our commander, putting lands from the graveyard onto the battlefield all the time. So let's move away from that headache and let's go to Hornet Queen. When it enters the battlefield, you create 4 1/1 green insect creature tokens with Flying and Death Touch, and it also has Flying and Death Touch, and it's a 2/2. So again, just a mass token generator right here. Another really interesting bug to add into this list would be Phyrexian Swarmlord because it does have Infect, and at the beginning of your upkeep, put a 1/1 green insect creature token with Infect on the battlefield for each poison counter your opponents have. This is definitely a card to have if you want to have a little bit more of an Infect sub-theme in here, but I think it's a great way to make sure that you overflow your opponents with bugs that have Infect. I will say I do have a personal pet card in here, and that's Giant Adaphage. This is absolutely incredible in here because it does have Trample, and it's a 7/7, so it has really good stats, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, create a token that's a copy of Giant Anaphage. So you can see where this is probably going. When you swing with it, you're going to make a token copy of it, and then on top of that, on the next turn, when you swing with both of them, you're going to make 2 other copies of it, and then after that, 4 other copies of it, and then just the list goes on and on. This is going to be a hassle for your opponents to deal with. So I would definitely say a lot of these different types of insects could definitely end the game, and so that you could gain victory with a bunch of bugs. So overall, I do have to say this is a pretty powerful commander in my opinion. At first, I looked at it, I'm like, okay, it's whatever, but then the more I looked at it, the more I started brewing with it, the more power I realized that it does have. Again, having that Crucible of Worlds on a commander is absolutely insane, and especially when you have a lot of different synergies that with landfall, it's just icing on the cake. So my patron, It's Toad, was super excited about this commander, and I honestly see why, because this is a super impactful card on the game. Let me know how you feel about this card down below, and with that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.